Hi guys, Ria from Aloha Plant Life here, and today I wanted to go over 15 common mistakes that people who are beginners to houseplants tend to make. And I want to start off by saying that there's no shame here if you have done any of these. I've done some of these. Pretty much everybody I know when they were new to plants has done at least one thing on this list that I'm going to cover today. So do not feel bad if you have done any of these. I'm just going through this to help set you and your plants up for success moving forward. And I think these are all things that most of us wish we had known when we were new to plants. So hopefully this will be of help to you. We're going to dive right into this though, and I want to start with the number one thing that I think is a problem, and that is not doing research on your plants. So let's say you were at the store shopping, you see this cute little plant, you pick it up, you bring it home, and you have zero idea of what kind of light it needs, how often it needs to be watered, does it like to dry completely out in between waterings, things like that. And if you don't know those things, you're not going to do very well with this plant typically. So that is the first thing you absolutely need to do. And I honestly would recommend doing your research at the plant store before you actually buy the plant, because there's nothing worse than buying it because you thought it was cute, getting it home, researching, and then discovering that you really have nowhere in your house to keep this plant. So keep that in mind as we go along. Make sure that you're always doing your research first and foremost. The next big thing that I see is rushing to put your plant right in the spot where you permanently want it to live as soon as you get home. So I have my Ficus elastica teneke over here, and this plant likes a lot of light. He's living in my living room windows, which are southern facing, but I did not put him there right when I brought him home. It would have been too much. So in nurseries and plant stores, plants are typically under some sort of shade cloth. They're not in direct light. Even though they're in bright indirect light, it's not the same as the bright indirect light in your house, because that is typically coming from a window that is not shaded or covered with something sheer. So you don't want to rush to put them in that direct light because it can burn their leaves and cause stress to the plant. So you need to gradually acclimate the plants to the light by putting them a little bit closer, a little bit closer, a little bit closer, and keeping an eye on them to see if anything bad is happening. If it is, back them off. And maybe you never get them as close as you thought you were going to and they permanently live further back, that's fine. But just don't rush to put them there because it's gonna cause some problems. Now, another thing when we first bring our plants home, new plant owners often are in a rush to just repot a plant right away. And most of the time, well, I'm gonna say all of the time, you don't wanna repot right away, but the one thing you do want to do is make sure you've checked those roots. Make sure that you've slipped that plant out of its pot. I've got my cyclamen here. Absolutely love this plant. I don't think I've shown you guys this plant yet. Look at these little papery, thin, white flowers that, I mean, they're so cute. I love this plant. I love this. So cute. But I did want to use this as an example here to show you guys of checking your roots. So you can easily just very gently slip the plant out of its pot and look and see if it looks like it's going to need to be repotted soon. This one definitely does not need to be repotted yet, and it didn't need to be repotted when I bought it either. So in that situation, I know that this is going to stay in this pot for quite a while before I will ever repot it because it's just not ready to be repotted. And if you're not sure how to know if a plant needs to be repotted, I have a video on it. I'll link it up above for you and down below in the description. So in this situation, I'm leaving this plant in its nursery pot until I see those signs that it needs to be repotted, and then I'm just gonna keep it in a cover pot. This is its cover pot, so that it looks cuter than just sitting around in its plastic nursery pot. Now, if you had taken that plant out and it was root bound, the roots were just totally wrapped up in there, then yes, it's gonna need to be repotted soon, but still wouldn't repot it right away because it is trying to acclimate to your house. We just talked about the lighting. So it's trying to get used to this new lighting in your house, this new environment. It's already a little bit stressed. You don't wanna add on to that stress by repotting it immediately. So give it at least a month, I would say, in your house if it is root bound before you go repotting it. Now, since we're talking about repotting, let me move into some other mistakes that I see. And one is messing with the roots. When people go to repot, they take that plant and they try to break all the dirt off the roots and loosen it up and everything. And you don't need to do that. That's going to stress out your plant. Your plant's roots will figure it out on their own. So don't mess with them when you go to repot. Just leave them how they are, putting them into that pot. The next thing is choosing the wrong pot. This is another huge one that I see. There's actually several things when it comes to choosing the pot. So number one, biggest problem. People who are new to plants have a tendency to just see a cute pot, So for example, here's a cute little white pot, right? And they say, oh great, I'm gonna get that pot for my plant. Well, one of two problems, but the biggest one I wanna talk about first is this plant pot has no drainage holes. And that is a big no-no for people who are new to plants, because this can very easily lead to overwatering situations that then lead to root rot that then kill your plant. So I highly do not recommend, especially if you're new to plants, using pots that do not have drainage holes. Now, one way around that, as I just showed you, and same thing here, this is my Alocasia bambino, by the way. Lovely, cute little plant. If I can get it out of here, I will show you what I'm talking about. So one way around that is, you like this cute little pot? Fine, get it. Keep the plant in its nursery pot, which has drainage holes, and then just stick it in here and use this as a cover pot. Now, if you do this, here's another thing I see quite frequently. Don't water the plant in here. Take it out and set it aside on a tray or something to water it. Or if you do water in here, make sure a few minutes after you've watered it, you pull the plant out and you dump any excess water that's drained in the pot out. Otherwise, it's basically like you planted it directly into that pot with no drainage holes. So keep that in mind when you're picking your pots. Now, the next thing related to pots that I see, which is a huge deal too, is people have a tendency to want to buy a bigger pot and think like, okay, eventually this plant is going to get this big because you did your research, like I said, for number one tip, and you found out it's going to be this tall one day. Well, I'm just going to go ahead and put it in a pot that's big enough to accommodate that, and it'll grow into it. Don't do it. What happens there is you're having too much soil for the size of the root structure, and the roots don't need all that extra soil to grow into right now. And then you're creating a problem of all that soil just stays wet because the roots are nowhere near it. They're not soaking the water up out of it. The plant's not using the water. And now your roots are once again sitting in water, and you're creating that potential for root rot. So definitely avoid that. Now, the other thing when we're talking about picking pots and repotting that I think a lot of beginners do and don't realize that it's not a good idea is you go out and you just buy a bag of potting soil from your local hardware store or wherever it may be, and you just take that, handfuls of that, put it in a pot, and you pot that plant up in there. And now you're starting to see, you know, a couple weeks later, some signs that maybe your plant's been overwatered. You always want to make sure that you're adding amendments to your soil. It's totally fine to start with a basic bag of soil from your local store. That's what I do. I use premium organic potting soil from my local nursery, but I always add amendments to it. And what are amendments? There are all kinds of amendments. You could use perlite, you could use pumice, you could use orchid bark, but amendments are things that are going to typically, the main thing, and this is the main thing I want you to think about them for, things that are going to help add extra drainage to your soil. Because one of the number one things that we all do, I'm pretty sure everybody has overwatered a plant at some point in their lives, unless you just were naturally a chronic underwaterer to begin with. But most of us have overwatered a plant at least once. And so if you're overwatering your plants, it's not good for them, but having extra drainage in there helps them to dry out quicker. So that is something you always want to add, and I will do a whole nother video series for you guys on specific soil mixes for specific types of plants, but that is also something you want to keep in mind here. But if you've done your research up front, like I said, you will probably have a good idea of a succulent such as Pearl over here, my string of pearls. Oh, she's so cute. I love her. She needs a much chunkier soil, so a lot of extra drainage, versus the cyclamen that I showed you earlier is a very moisture-loving plant, kind of like the calatheas, so it doesn't need as much extra drainage in there. So this might be a 2/3 potting mix to 1/3 extra drainage situation, where this might be a half and half, because she wants a lot more drainage. So let me set these guys aside. So the next big mistake I see is people thinking that you have to water on a specific schedule and that all plants need to be watered once a week. Does anybody actually know where this came from? I mean, I see it all over the internet of like people saying, yeah, you gotta water your plants once a week. Where did this start? If anybody knows, please comment down below, because it really makes no sense, and I don't understand how this ever became a thing in the plant world. And now all of us here on YouTube and on social media are trying to tell you, no, that's not right. I don't know how this like false information got started. So once again, if anybody knows, comment down below. But you definitely don't need to water your plants on a schedule. You don't need to water them once a week. Well, some of them you might need to, but not all of them. I'm talking about this as a blanket statement of every Tuesday at 10 a.m. you go around and you water every plant in your house. Nope. Don't do it. That's not how it works. Each plant has different water requirements. Each plant is going to use up its water at a different rate. So you're just definitely setting yourself up for disaster if you water on a set schedule like that. So for example, my little piccolo banda here, Peperomia piccolo banda, with its cute little leaves. This is a peperomia. Peperomias are really sensitive about how often they're watered. You need to let them dry almost completely out. Not totally, because if they start to get droopy and then you rewater them, you do that a couple times, letting them get droopy and then rewatering, and it's game over for these plants. So you need to keep an eye on them, make sure when they have like, you know, bottom quarter, maybe the bottom eighth of the pot is still a little bit damp. That's when I go in and water this guy. But my calatheas and my cyclamen that I showed you, they like water, lots of water. And so they're definitely going to get water before I let it get that dry. I would never let those plants get that dry. So that's going to happen on different schedules. Also the size of the plant. A small pot like this is going to dry out way quicker than a big pot like this. So it's going to change how often you need to water your plants. So what you really need to be doing is checking the soil using your finger, and I'm going to talk about another big mistake related to this next, but you want to use your finger, get it down in there as far as you can, figure out where the soil's wet to, and water based off of that. For most plants, you are going to want to let them dry at least bare minimum, a third of the way down in the pot. That's what I do for my calatheas. And once again, if you're seeing signs of underwatering above, and I will link that video up above and down below for you as well, then you would want to go ahead and water. So for example, if your plant's totally drooping over, go water it, right? But some plants, you're going to let them dry completely out, like succulents. You need to let them dry completely out and look for signs of underwatering before you water those again, because if you don't, you're going to have overwatered them. They're not going to be happy. So perhaps another thing to keep in mind too is, so I've got my monstera sitting behind me, and you can see this is a huge pot. So you're probably thinking, my finger's not that long. How am I going to get down in there to test it and figure it out? You can use a chopstick. I actually think this is the easiest method to do for big plants like this that are hard to pick up. Because another thing is, you'll get used to over time the weight of your plant when you pick it up. It'll be lighter if it needs to be watered, and you'll start to figure that out. But for big plants like this, it's kind of awkward trying to pick this up to see how light it is every time. So I think something like a chopstick or a skewer, sticking it down into the soil, let it sit there for a few minutes, no more than probably 5, and then pull it out and see if it's wet, the stick is wet anywhere, and where on the stick it's wet too. And that will kind of give you a guide of how far down your plant is wet. Now, next mistake I see beginners do. This guy, or a similar one. There's a lot of two-pronged ones that aren't digital like this. This is a moisture meter. And a lot of people think, well, I'll just get a moisture meter and I will use that and I will rely on that moisture meter and everything will be okay. There's a lot of problems with this, you guys. The way these things work is based on conductivity. So it's reading electrical conductivity in your plant's soil, and water is a good conductor of electricity. So that is the basic concept of how these work, is they're reading the moisture based on, okay, I'm getting a lot of electrical conductivity, so this soil must be really wet. Well, what's the problem with that? Well, other things in your soil, other things in your water that you're using can cause conductivity as well. So your soil could be completely dry, your plant could need to be watered. You stick this thing in there, and because this is the potting soil that you put in this plant a year ago, and now all these salts and minerals that conduct electricity from your water and fertilizer and everything else have built up in this soil. So this guy reads those, even though they're not water, and says that you don't need to water that plant. So then you sit there and you let your plant get droopier and worse looking and everything else. That's why I don't rely on these. I don't want you guys to rely on these. You also can't calibrate these. There's no way to calibrate it. So how do you ever know that it's set to a baseline? Just try to avoid these. They're going to cause you more harm than good, in my opinion. Let's set that aside. The next common mistake I see is watering all of your plants with tap water. A lot of plants, yes, you can do that. Like, for example, my epipremnum, I think it's a pearls and jade after talking to you guys about it when I featured it in my bedroom plant tour video, and I was kind of going back and forth on whether this was a pearls and jade or an enjoy. But this plant is totally fine with tap water. No problems whatsoever. It's like, whatever, just give me water, let me dry completely out. I don't care what kind of water it is. I'm fine. On the other hand, you have, once again, the calatheas, like the Macquayana and like these two that are sitting behind me here, my Tenanthe setosa and my Tenanthe burl-marxii, they do not want tap water. Now, I water these ones with filtered water and they do just fine, but some people and certain varieties of calathea and other prayer plants, you're gonna even need to go as far as to use distilled water. But definitely, I use filtered water on these. And if I'm being honest with you, just to keep it simple, I use filtered water on everything unless I'm like in a pinch. But keep that in mind. I highly recommend just using filtered water if you can. But if you are seeing some signs of weirdness on your plant, especially like dried leaf tips and browning leaf tips, maybe if you're using tap water, it might be time to back off the tap water and switch to the filtered water. I'm gonna set this gal aside. So the next mistake I see involves feeding your plants, so fertilizing. A lot of people are just immediately go and start fertilizing that plant right away, and really you typically don't need to. Most of the plants that you buy have some kind of slow release fertilizer in them. They've been being fertilized regularly at the nurseries before they hit the plant stores, and they really probably don't need to be fertilized for the first month at least that you bring them home. And then once you do start fertilizing, a common mistake I see is fertilizing way too often. So a lot of the fertilizers say to fertilize with every watering. You really don't need to do that. I fertilize once a month during the growing season, and if my plants are still putting out new growth in the winter, I keep doing once a month. If they stop growing in the winter, I back it off to once every other month. And that's really enough for your plants. Now, on the flip side of that, I've also seen new plant owners have a problem with fertilizing not often enough, like never fertilizing. Always make sure you are fertilizing your plants at some point. And once again, during your research, you will probably get an idea of whether specific plants need to be fertilized more often or not. But definitely make sure you're feeding your plants at some point. Another big mistake I see is bringing a new plant home, such as this little Hoya curtisii, super cute, and immediately taking it and setting it right next to one of your other plants in your home. Maybe it's even touching. I don't want to let them touch because they actually live in different areas of my house right now. And the reason I don't want to let them touch is because maybe one of them has a spider mite situation I can't see yet on it, and the other one doesn't, and I don't want them to get pests from each other. And that is why it is always very important as part of acclimating your plants when you bring them into your home to isolate new plants for a period of time. I actually would recommend quarantining them, if you will, away for at least 1 week. I honestly do mine longer than that. I do it for like 2 to 3 weeks. Sometimes I'll even go a whole month depending on the plant, because some plants are more prone to pests than others. And so I really, and especially if they're prone to spider mites, because it takes a while to see the spider mites, they're not really very visible to the naked eye. I will keep those separated longer because you do not want to spread pests around your house. Everybody hates pests, we know. It's horrible. Nobody likes pests. But it's easier to get it under control if you only have it on one plant than if you have it on a lot of plants. So make sure you're isolating them away and keeping a close eye on them for any signs of pests and addressing it as soon as it happens. Another thing that I will do when I bring a new plant in, when I'm getting ready to quarantine it, I will go ahead and I will, number one, wipe those leaves down completely with a damp rag or spray those leaves down under the sprayer in my kitchen sink or in the shower. I'll let them dry, and then I will just go ahead and give them a preventative spray down with some kind of spray such as neem oil or horticultural oil. Wow, that was a mouthful this morning. Yeah, and that way you're kind of setting it up for maybe there's something on there I can't see, let's just go ahead and dress it now. Or maybe one of my other plants where I'm gonna put this might have something that I haven't caught yet. And now I've given this a preventative spray down to help maybe deter pests from getting onto it when it is ready to move into group with my other plants. This brings me to the next big mistake, which is not regularly checking all of your plants closely for pests. You should be, every time you water at least, because you're getting up in your plant's business to water it, look on those leaves, top and bottom closely, and see if you see any signs of pests, because the sooner you get to those pests, the easier it is to get rid of them. If you're seeing webbing from spider mites, I mean, you've got an uphill battle going on. Now, if you're checking regularly and you're seeing some other signs of spider mites, which that's a whole nother video, but if you are seeing signs of pests, you address it right away. It's a much easier fight, trust me. So just making sure you're checking those leaves regularly will definitely be a huge help to you if a pest outbreak does occur. The next one is getting too many plants right away. If you are new to plants and you go out and you buy 25 plants and bring them into your home, and they're all plants from different genuses, different families even, and all of them are having like different care requirements, that can be overwhelming because you don't know anything about any of those plants yet. Yes, you're gonna go do your research, like I said, but there's gonna be a lot of different care requirements for you to remember. And it's gonna be hard to keep up with it right away versus if you just had a few plants and got used to how to care for those first before adding to your collection. I know this is going to be a hard one because if you're really getting into plants and you're really excited about them and you want to build that collection, you're going to see plants in the store and you're going to be like, but it won't be there again next week, or I might not see it again until next spring and I want to buy it. You'll see them again. You'll see them again. Don't worry about that. It's better to take it a little bit slower when you're first starting out to set yourself up for success, because you also just don't want to feel like you have a black thumb, because I truly believe, I've said this before, that nobody has a black thumb. It's all about finding the green thumb that is right for you. And that may mean certain types of plants are just not your plants. But everybody can be successful with plant care and a successful plant parent. But it helps if you actually set yourself up to be successful from the get-go. And that means not buying too many plants right away all at once when you're first starting out. And the last thing that I want to mention is panicking over every little thing that you see going on with your plant. I think a lot of plant parents overreact. You see a leaf turn yellow. Oh my gosh, did I overwater it? Oh my gosh, did I underwater it? Oh my gosh. You know what? That leaf may just be ending its leaf life cycle. Leaves die, leaves fall off. It's just like you shed hair. It's not really a problem unless you're seeing it happen on a lot of leaves all at once or anything like that. But what happens is, I think plant parents who are new see something happen and then they freak out. They don't realize that maybe it's a totally natural thing and that they've done nothing wrong. And then they misinterpret it as something they did wrong. And then the way they try to fix it is the thing that actually hurts the plant and then ends up killing it. So try not to be panicky over every little thing. Just back it off a little bit. See if it's just the one leaf. See what's going on. And be very careful about how you react to the things you see going on with your plants. So those are the 15 biggest, most common plant care mistakes that I see beginners make. So if you can get yourself to a position where you're not doing those, you will 100% be setting yourself up for a higher level of success in being a plant parent. I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. If you have any additional questions on anything we've discussed today, or questions on anything I didn't cover in here that you've struggled with, please comment down below or message me on Facebook or Instagram at Aloha Plant Life. And if you have not yet hit that like and or subscribe button down below, please do so. And I look forward to seeing you again next time. Aloha!